Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Nothing But Thieves called Broken Machine. You know, of all the albums that have landed on my schedule thus far this year suggested by patrons, this is among the more perplexing additions. And the funny thing is that you wouldn't think that if you knew anything about the band, but I'm still kind of perplexed all the same, mostly surrounding why anybody would want me to cover this in a full-length review. Let's get real here. I may have gone off on a rant on Twitter, I think last week, about how modern hard rock frustrates me with its embrace of distorted, blocky, tuneless masses instead of actual guitar-driven melodic hooks. But the truth is that all of modern rock radio frustrates me these days, because on the flip side of the breakdown-obsessed chunks of riff, we have the sleeper hold of reverb-soaked indie rock with lyrics that in a better era would be laughed off the stage. And well, of course there are exceptions. Hell, I can't stop listening to that last Def Havana album, which in retrospect defied entirely too many expectations when it comes to their sound and deserves a lot more attention. But the rule is that once we tread into what's now defined by major labels as alternative rock, I have a hard time staying awake, especially if I spot the acts who obviously inspire them. So entering Nothing But Thieves, another British alt-rock group that has toured with your trendy staples on rock radio that are hard to describe as real rock music, like AWOL Nation and 21 Pilots. Yes, they also tour with Muse, their most blatant inspiration, especially for the frontman Connor Mason, but they are a poor man's Muse at best, and let's be real here, with nowhere near the progressive compositional chops or shredding, and a penchant for theatricality that didn't really always stick the landing, especially in the songwriting. I don't think that they are a bad group. Good guitar and bass interplay and solid pickups can redeem a lot. And in terms of ballads, they actually mostly stuck the landing for me. But that self-titled debut in 2015 just did not resonate all that much. I barely remember it. It's not bad, but not particularly remarkable either. But apparently, their sophomore album is a lot better, and it's even picking up a little bit of critical acclaim, and my Patreon supporters wanted me to cover this before the National or Always, indie rock groups that I am very much interested in exploring as soon as possible. So okay, what the hell? How is Broken Machine? Well, folks, I hate to disappoint you here, but I got pretty much exactly what I was expecting with Nothing But Thieves' Broken Machine. A completely underwhelming alt-rock record that I couldn't help but find painfully derivative and basic across the board. And what blows my mind is that most people don't seem to be hearing that. Maybe it's just the benefit of time and distance, because if I guaranteed this has been released, let's say 15 or 20 years ago, critics would have rightly lambasted this as a barely adequate Radiohead ripoff in the same way that they wrongly did so with early Elbow and Porcupine Tree, and rightly did so with early Trappist and Coldplay. But you know what? In good conscience, I can't even say that this rises to the level of Parachutes or The Man Who, the latter of which at least had the decency to get Nigel Godrich on production in order to flesh out that sound. So okay, let's start with the composition and production. And like with their debut, the bass lines and the melodic grooves on the guitar, they tend to at least have some decent interplay, even if the loud, soft, restrained bass to exploding chorus tends to get worked to death here. Problem is, well, everything else. And this goes right from the tonal choice to the production blending, with the absolute worst case coming in with so much of the drums and percussion. How anyone thinks that flat, slappy pickup right at the front of the mix when I was just a kid for the kick drum is excusable is beyond me, reflecting a rubbery stiffness and weird clipping around some of the cymbal pickups across the album that does damage to any hope of a consistent groove. But it's another case of trying to awkwardly blend drum machines with real drums and showing no real consideration for properly matching the fidelity of those drum machines and their mix placement. It's most egregious on the title track, but really it happens whenever they try to fuse in a hand clap somewhere into the mix. It just feels stiff. It doesn't fit. And what's alarming is that producer Mike Crossey has proven plenty capable of managing this balance in the past with the 1975 or the Arctic Monkeys. And you can tell that many of the pickups, they do have some real texture to them, especially the acoustic guitar. But you know what? The choice to flatten out so many of the electric guitar into weedy little strips, which reaches its absolute worst with the pseudo-reggae tones on Soda, or just completely neglect any sort of guitar solo or progressive element, that's utterly beyond me. Muse might have been nakedly imitating Radiohead very early on, but you knew these guys could really shred when they wanted to. And while I get colorless, dreary melancholy is part of the point, Nigel Godrich was a smart enough producer for Radiohead back in the 90s to utilize sharper guitar pickups in order to flesh out the tone, or give the mix a deeper sense of atmosphere for contrast. Steven Wilson, he did that as well for Porcupine Tree. Whereas Nothing But Thieves, they seem to embrace the worst parts of modern production in terms of mainstream mainstream rock as well as that sound. Blocky chunks of guitar with more texture than tone, and desperately needing an atmosphere that it doesn't have, no matter how many ugly, watery layers you dump on top of all the guitar, which don't help the melody stand out. Now look, that's not saying that there aren't some hooks here, because yeah, there kind of are, mostly courtesy of guitars that pick up a little bit more momentum in the grooves and snarl like on Amsterdam and Not Made by Design, or the bounce that comes behind Live Like Animals. Not a great song, but I can get behind it. But the larger credit, it really has to go to Connor Mason, who is working his ass off to sell these tracks with delivery that really owes more to Matt Bellamy than it does to Tom York, which might not have been the best choice in retrospect. Muse at their very best, tilting in towards progressive, yet grandiose, and often utterly ridiculous swell, both in the writing and in the delivery, which Tom York has always had entirely too much dignity to really embrace. And yet Connor Mason falls into a weird dead zone between them where he's belting and tilting into an admittedly pretty great falsetto, but neither his content or his production can fully get him all the way there to truly explode or transcend or deliver any sort of raw intensity, which leads to a lot of theatricality and a feeling of drama being oversold, or conversely, melodrama that just can't get all the way there. And you know, maybe some of this could have been saved with sharper writing, and yet sadly, if I'm going to point to the area where Nothing But Thieves falls even more short than I was expecting, it's in the writing and themes. I'll restate what I said a year ago, and that I'm no huge Radiohead fan, but you can tell that Tom York's writing, especially in the 90s, could capture a brand of tighter introspection when it comes to the state of the world with real nuance and depth. I will give Radiohead that. Or say in the case of Muse, sure, it was over the top, it was ridiculous, but also took the opportunity to go for broke for big ideas. Mostly to mixed results, sure, but it was the right approach for the most part. The big problem with Nothing But Thieves, again, is that they're trying to split the difference. All the cynical angst, but none of the deeper nuance in order to back it up. I mean, take a good song like Amsterdam. It's a good concept in the frustration of trying to force originality when it might not even be possible to achieve, but it never asks the follow-up question. It ends up feeling very surface level when exploring the concept. Or take Sorry, an apology song which over-explains everything that he supposedly did, and ultimately can't help but feel a little bit accusatory in the second verse, while ultimately not really being specific in the apology, even despite the girl pointing it out in the song that it's his alcohol abuse that's the problem. But again, this record is much more interested in wallowing in its depressed nihilism, from the title track to the painfully generic creep riff that is Soda, to Hell Yeah, where apparently the world is so bad that the Nine Hells aren't a bad alternative after all. Of course, that assertion leads to a bit awkward feeling next to the atheistic screeds that filled the other half of this album, from a string of letdowns on I Was Just a Kid to I'm Not Made by Design, which is exactly what you think it's about, to the closer Afterlife, where apparently he's so broken now, why would he go through a second life of this, and oh dear god, this sounds like something that would have been rejected from XXXTentacion's debut. And you know what, I will say it again, nihilistic themes can get really, really boring if you're not going to say anything new with them, or at least embrace poetry that showcases some sort of dramatic arc or color to it. Here, the writing just feels painfully bland and obvious, the most blunt way possible in speaking these ideas, from the internal instability of Get Better to the seductive addiction of Particles to the painfully flimsy political commentary on Live Like Animals. At least when Trent Reznor wrote Hurt to end off the downward spiral, its very raw, basic language came from an album full of sadomasochism and nightmares, a stark moment of reality at the lonely core behind waves of passive aggression and then outright aggression. It doesn't even come close to earning any sort of real arc to that, and leaves the album really feeling like a slog, a lot longer than it should be. But at the end of the day, I don't know what I was expecting, because on some level, Broken Machine by Nothing But Thieves will likely do just fine on modern rock radio right now. Production that alternatively feels blocky, sloppily mixed, or just kind of derivative. Writing that is almost impressively impersonal and by the numbers, only saved from outright badness by a frontman whose voice really deserves better songs. In other words, not really a fan of this. I'm thinking a light 5 out of 10 and only really recommend it if for some reason you haven't heard all those 90s albums that this record cribs from generously, or if you're ignoring all the alternative and progressive rock groups that are doing similar sounds and much better even this year. Hell, from 2017 you got new albums from Elbow, Def Havana, and especially Steven Wilson. There just isn't much of an excuse for this record to drop as it is and for me to pay that much of attention. So, for the most part, I'm skipping it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know a lot of you have been requesting this, I know this review is not going to be popular, but guys, the writing on this record is not interesting, and the tonal balance and production is a total mess. If I could get behind this more, I would. It's not a bad record, it's just mediocre and honestly kind of forgettable. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to tell me how wrong I am, the poll's right there. And if you want to buy the album because of some sort of morbid curiosity, links in the description below. And if you guys want to get more involved in supporting this channel so I can talk about records that I would otherwise want to talk about, or albums that you would otherwise have more interest in, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week you guys get to add records or even movies to that schedule if you're in the higher tiers. I really do appreciate all of your support, especially considering pretty much every single one of my videos is getting hit with demonetization right out of the gate, so Patreon has been a tremendous help. I do appreciate that, but hey, we'll see how this goes. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.